Welcome to Out of the Blue. Out of the Blue is a new TV program here at MTSU, and it's going to have some light and lively segments and perhaps even some more serious segments as well. We welcome you. In all great and worthy enterprises, there's always one person who planted the seed, who gave birth to an idea, nurtured it, groomed it along the way, and turned it loose to fly on its own. This program, Out of the Blue, is making its debut, but its roots go a long way back to the early days of MTSU television. Over the years, we have shared stories of MTSU through Richard Hanna's Inside Academia, Bob Bullard's Recollections, Bob Pondillo's In the Middle, and MT Record, the monthly TV magazine produced by News and Public Affairs and Audiovisual Services. But the forerunner of all these programs was a modest discussion program nestled on a sofa and a couple of easy chairs called MT Scene, conceived and moderated by Dorothy Harrison. Close friends and colleagues knew her as Dot. Dot Harrison is the reason I'm here at MTSU. She hired me as a staff writer 18 years ago when she was the director of public relations, a role she served from 1976 to 2000. Now that was back in the day when MTSU was half its enrollment size, had a third fewer buildings, and Dot was University PR. Now Dot was the perfect talk show hostess. She was a good thinker and a fine speaker. She had a personality that sparkled, and she was an accomplished actor. She was synonymous with Auntie Mame, a role that she brought to life at the Murfreesboro Little Theater years ago. And it's true, Dot could coax the blues right out of the horn. When Dot sat down to interview anyone, she instantly became a good friend. She treated the little knowns and the nationally knowns as just plain folks. She was never intimidated. She was only immensely interested. That's what made her so good and so enduring. So some of us younger upstarts were privileged to know Dot and work with her on MT Scene. When she was ready to walk away from it all, many of us took the baton and have tried to carry on a tradition of excellence that Dot established. Oh, we've changed the names, altered the formats, utilized all the newer bells and whistles. But when it comes right down to it, we all had, as they say in some parts of the country, good fetching up. Dot taught us, inspired us, and she was immensely interested in us. She cared about us, and she never was shy about telling us so. Well, you know by now where this is going. Dot passed away on September 8th of this year at the age of 75, finally succumbing to Alzheimer's disease, an affliction which had gradually eroded her mental acuity over the past several years. Yet, in spite of her decline, Dot retained that broad smile, and her white head of hair accentuated the glow that radiated from her. She was a joyful Southern lady. She was a dedicated professional and a committed public servant. She was an innovator and an instigator. I truly believe that everything Dot did in life, on stage, or on the TV set was to illuminate the goodness in others. She had discovered the treasure of reaching beyond her grasp, beyond ego or self-glorification. She knew the power of putting herself at the end of the line and helping others move toward the front. So, Dot, this toast comes from Out of the Blue to you. Your greatest role was when you were you, and it was a great run.
Well, we're back with more of Out of the Blue. I'm Bob Pondillo. Thanks for joining us. Many things happening here on this brand new program. One of which is we always have interesting guests when we go inside the university and take a look around. And Reuben Kyle is joining us today. Dr. Kyle is Professor Emeritus of Economics out of the College of Business. And because we're coming up on our 100th anniversary here at MTSU next year, Dr. Kyle, among others, are doing little memoirs, sort of remembrances of what happened here. And you were asked to write something about student life at what was then called the Teachers College here at MTSU. Well, let's talk, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
And let's talk about that a little bit. How many kids back 100 years ago did we have here at MTSU?
Well, my benchmark was 1935. The freshman class of 1935 had about 150 students. The total enrollment was about 500, of whom about 70%, 350 or so, lived on campus.
Wow, and isn't it true that now we're around what?
26, more than 26,000 students.
Kids.
I'm not sure what the final enrollment was.
Yeah, me either, but still one of the largest, if not the largest, undergraduate institutions in the state. So that's,
exactly.
And back then it was about 150 and 500. Amazing, amazing. Where did they live? Where did they stay? You said 70% stayed in dormitories on campus.
They did.
Well, that's not the case anymore.
No, absolutely not.
How is
absolutely
that?
Not. No, there were 3 dormitories, 2 women's dormitories and 1 for the men. Those 3 buildings are still on campus. Lyons Hall and Reynolds Hall were the 2 women's dormitories. That's if you face Old Main, that's to the left. And then there's Jones Hall, which again to the right, all of which are still there, not necessarily as dormitories any longer.
Right.
But that's
where students these days, don't they just live off campus?
Yes, they do. But by and large, they do. They don't have much choice.
That's true.
And in those days, there were most of the people who lived off campus lived at home, and either walked to campus, or maybe a few of them commuted.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another thing. We have a lot of students here, but there's also a lot of working students. You know, they are full-time, but they also work during the evening or work here on campus. I don't know, was that the case, or do we have full-time students?
Definitely not. Definitely not the case. There were a few jobs for students on campus. They paid very modestly.
I would think.
But there were a few of those jobs. And it was extremely rare for a student to work off campus. One of the interesting stories about that was by a man named Whitney Stegall. Now, Whitney Stegall became a lawyer, a judge, and a very distinguished member of the community.
Very familiar name, absolutely.
But he said when he tried to register, he had $2.50 in his pocket, which wasn't enough to register. And eventually he did get registered. But to support himself, he did all kinds of jobs, including working in a funeral home. Drove what he called the ambulance and assisted with the funerals. So he was pretty rare.
Well, speaking of that, how much did it cost to go to the Teachers College back then?
If you were a citizen of Tennessee, if you were an in-state student, there was no tuition. Okay, now there wasn't a registration fee of $15. And even in those days, there was an activities fee, but it was $3 compared to what that's much more substantial.
And I know it's hard for us because we look at things through presentist eyes. You know, we don't, you know, to try to put ourselves, I guess, in that time period, it would be hard to get your mind wrapped around it these days, like from the 21st century. But what I did read from the paper that you wrote, a wonderful paper. Kids were pretty much kids back then, as they are today. And things never really changed. There was hazing. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, the kids who lived, I'm sure it was mainly restricted to the students who lived on campus. There was hazing among both the women's students and the men's students. The women's students would have what they call the kangaroo court, and they would wake the girls up in the middle of the night and march them into some dark room where there was lit only by candles, and they would grill them, and then when they get through with them, they would assign them to do duty for some upper class
like
women.
wash clothes or clean the room,
do things like that. Yeah. The men were a little bit more rambunctious, I think. Apparently, they had the men students ran belt lines. I'm not sure exactly how that worked, but whacked them on the whacked them on the fanny as they went by.
Right, sort of a gauntlet. You have to run
Exactly.
through it.
Probably the most interesting thing that they did was they call stacking the rooms. A student would be out of their room, and the rest of the students would move all the furniture out of their room. So the student would come back.
Right.
And
the room would be
nothing,
empty. Right,
nothing
exactly.
there.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah,
right, of course.
sure.
But see, I think we're giving some of our students some ideas. We better watch them. Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure it's something like that happening.
However, didn't one fella or a group of fellas, I think, pick up a car or something and place the car on?
One of the actually there were two remembrances about this. Both of these guys played on the football team, and they both had cars. They both had one was a Model T, I think, and one was a Model A Ford. They were small, and the tricksters would one time they took the guy with the Model T, put the car up on the steps of Old Main, which is pretty
That's a lot of steps
level.
there.
He got in trouble with the president. Of course, the president's office was in Old Main
Right.
at that point as well.
Oh dear.
And the other guy said that he came back from football practice one day and found his car hanging in a tree.
Well, see, that apparently was that was college life.
Yeah,
back
it was.
The 1930s. Let me ask about where we got the notion of the blue and white and the calling ourselves the Blue Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't the Blue Raiders to begin, were we?
No, now you're getting out of my area a little bit. I'm not exactly sure when I don't exactly recall when that happened, but it was sometime. It was before the period that I looked at. I think they were already called the Blue Raiders by that point, and blue and white were the colors because some of the dormitory rooms were painted blue and white.
That's right, blue, white, and gray, I think you mentioned. I'll tell you, it's a wonderful little paper that Dr. Kyle has written here about student life here at MTSU back when it wasn't MTSU, was still the Teachers College. And we're doing sort of a look back, a sort of a backwards glance, a remembrance, as it were, of how we were back 100 years ago, or in this case in the 1930s, but still quite a number of years ago. And this is just one of many, many essays and papers that will be available next year. And I think there's going to be a bound book out there.
I think that's the intention. I don't know exactly where that's what stage that's at right now, but I think
or at least it may be online, so we'll be able to read more about this as we approach the event, which is not too long from now, actually. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kyle. I appreciate it. Dr. Reuben Kyle, Professor Emeritus in Economics out of the College of Business here at MTSU. More Out of the Blue in a moment.